was 18 years old, and I was the classic snot-nosed kid who thought he knew everything about business, and I ended up selling multi-$100 million outsourcing deals. I would have never obviously done that on my own. Their competency is raising money, not building a profitable, viable, sustainable business. And it kind of pissed me off.
How did they say, let's do it and let's bootstrap this business? What makes the difference?
If you look at the levers of cash flow, the number one thing that will move the needle the most is your price.
What's the thing that every business owner needs to learn from this? If you were to give one key tip, you say, business owner, do this and it will help you.
Sell one thing one way. And the point of that was they weren't trying to do 50 different things, and they weren't trying to go to market in 12 different ways. They had a core offering that was highly differentiated. Different is better than better.
Welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rose, the host, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Martin. Pete and I met in Austin, Texas, back in October 2025. And Pete is a serial entrepreneur. He's worked at businesses like SAP and IBM, but more importantly, he's scaled and sold 4 companies. He's got 3 on the go at the moment. And from my perspective, he's the author of Scale Faster, which I was delighted to talk about with him when we were in Austin. Vern introduced him because obviously Vern is the author of many books with the word scale in it, and Pete comes on with the word scale faster. So for me, we need to learn a lot from this because so many businesses take time to scale. But if we can scale faster, we can learn how to do it quicker, we can get better results, and ultimately we can get to the financial reward and the cultural reward we look forward to. So Pete, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Oh, thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. It's good to chat with you.
You mentioned about working for big businesses and IBM and SAP in there. And, you know, whenever we go back in time, nobody got fired for hiring IBM was the mantra from many, many years ago. What made you make that transition from the big boys of SAP and IBM to those scale up, sell up, enjoy the life businesses?
Yeah, I actually did things backwards. So before I worked for IBM and before I went to university, I actually started up a car leasing company.
Wow.
And so I was 18 years old, and I was the classic snot-nosed kid who thought he knew everything about business, and the world kind of slapped me around quite a bit. And then I ended up selling I was a franchisee basically. So I ended up selling those franchise rights to another franchisee and decided to then go back to university, which I did. And I got my bachelor's and MBA in 3.5 years. And then I was very involved because I went back to school as a little bit older kid. Got very involved in school, got to be friendly with the chairman of the board of the university, and he essentially convinced me to go work for IBM. So I went completely in the opposite direction. And I tell you, if I had to do it all over again, I would probably do the same thing just because I learned so much about professional selling and business and all kinds of stuff from IBM. I ended up selling multi-$100 million outsourcing deals. I would have never obviously done that on my own. So training was fantastic. And then went from IBM to SAP, ran a $100 million business, and really honed my management skills. And so all of that stuff was very foundational to me to then go back into the entrepreneurial space and start companies again. So
it's interesting, isn't it? You know, those big businesses, you know, there's lots of people who start, you know, they finish school and disappear off into the entrepreneurial world. But then there's people like me and you who have that background experience. You know, I worked for Rolls-Royce, you know, big blue chip company, did my MBA, went through that traditional route of doing things and then set up my own business. And it's really interesting because I always tell people, you know, the reason I set up my own business is because my dad ran his own business and my brother ran his own business. So for me, it was what I was going to do. You know, my dad set up his business in 1982. And, that's what I grew up with as a 12-year-old boy. He was setting up his own business and running it.
And I had the same thing. My dad owned his own business, and my grandfather did, and my brother did. So yeah, same thing.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at it, you know, some people would say, hey, never do this own business stuff. It's a tough life. And I know my grandfather was very, very upset when I left Rolls-Royce. Why are you leaving such a big company? You've got a pension in there. You can retire on that. But for me, I had that urge to do something else. So what was it that encouraged you to, A, set up the leasing business in the original first place? And why did you go back to entrepreneurial businesses after great names like IBM and SAP?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of two things. I think the one is I am the classic, what I like to say, fiercely independent middle child. So if somebody tells me to do something, I do completely the opposite, right? Just kind of classic
Yeah.
birth order stuff there. And then, as I mentioned, my grandfather, my uncle, my dad, my brother were all entrepreneurs. So I think I was kind of
Mm.
genetically encoded to do that. So I think it was that combination. And I learned from as an 18-year-old, I had a lot less risk than, if you have a mortgage and a wife and kids and all these other responsibilities, I could just go do whatever I wanted to do. And I learned how difficult starting and growing a business was, you know, but it's still, the still kind of is in my belly, right? It's just something that I had to do.
So I'm going to fast forward a bit, and I'm going to come back to the businesses you've started in a bit. But I want to fast forward to one of the reasons that you and I got talking originally was when you talked about scale faster, and you described this as good to great for the rest of us, and I love that as a phrase because Jim Collins wrote Good to Great many years back, and that's the MBA text that got me into business back in 2000 and whatever it was 2000 at the time. We've all seen the book, we've all read Good to Great in different lines, we've seen how that works, but Good to Great for the rest of us. So what was it that prompted you to take that, and I'm going to use the word 3-year deep dive into bootstrap businesses that wanted to scale, because that was a transition again from your own businesses.
Yeah, I think it was a couple things. So I sold my last large business to KPMG around 11 years ago. And after I sold that, I thought I was a clever fellow. And so I was going to write a book telling everybody how clever I was. And at some point, I realized I'm like, no, nobody cares about what I did, right? Maybe my friends and family will buy half a dozen books, but other than that, they don't care. So so that kind of writing a book had kind of stuck in the back of my head. And then during COVID, as the VC money in the States was flowing, I swear like every week there was a new unicorn founder, right? So that used to be kind of a unique thing, and it wasn't so unique anymore. And something just hit me about it, just really upset me because I'm like, you know what? The business media is giving all this press to somebody who just their competency is raising money, not building a profitable, viable, sustainable business. And it kind of pissed me off. And so I kind of went back to, um, you know, we should be putting the focus on the folks that you work with and I work with and Vern works with that have built these very fantastic companies, give back to community, right? They didn't necessarily raise up growth equity. They were good at running a company. And so so I decided to kind of do the Jim Collins thing, the good to great thing. And what I love about good to great is not so much what came out of it, but the level of rigor and discipline he put into the research, right? Really, nobody had done that before. Maybe Tom Peters before him 30, 40 years ago, but other than that, really nobody had done that level of due diligence and research. And so I decided to go do that. And as you mentioned, it took me 3 years to do that. A little context was I took the Inc. 5000, which is a thing in the
Yeah.
US that looks at the fastest growing 5,000 companies in the country. And I took 7 years worth of that data and I filtered them by companies that doubled revenues every year for at least 4 consecutive years, which is a very, very difficult thing to do. It's difficult to double your revenues in 1 year, let alone 4 years, let alone 4 consecutive years.
Yeah. Well.
Um,
Well.
so once I did that, there was started out with a little over 32,000 unique companies, took it down to 386, okay, just by that filter. And then I wanted to specifically look at companies that did this by bootstrapping. And the reason that I did was I like to half jokingly say, if you give me $100 million, I can grow my company fast too. I can just go hire a lot of people and right to do that on a bootstrapped internally generated cash flow basis is really difficult. So I knew if I put that filter on it and I was able to get to these folks, I would learn some really valuable things. And so once I put that filter of, you didn't raise growth equity, that took the number from 386 down to 324. And then I spent the better part of 3 years digging through over 95 interviews of the CEOs and their management teams to figure out how the heck these folks did it.
And interesting, just for context, we didn't have Chat GPT to do that analysis at the time, so that's a labour of love to go through that data as well, no doubt.
Yep, for sure.
Got to do it. Got to do it by hand. So
Yeah.
interesting. You said something there about Bootstrap. I think there's something here, isn't it? You showed us a slide while we were in Austin. I thought this summed up, and I haven't got the slide in front of me, but basically you said, would you invest? Just the slide I mean. Just sum that up for me because I want to get the audience to think about: would you invest in these businesses?
Yeah. So what was probably so I did a lot of asked the CEOs about their backgrounds, right? Where they went to school, how much time they spend at work, do they have an executive assistant, do they take vacations, like a lot about their personal background. And I had this thesis and theory going in that these were, highly educated MBAs, right? Went to the best schools, had done multiple businesses, and it couldn't have been farther from the truth. And so that slide that I put up basically is, they're first time founders. They didn't have a business plan, literally. When they started their companies, they weren't exactly sure what business they were in. They did have lots of pivots to kind of figure out what market they were in. They, on and on and on. They were very average James and Joes, right, off the street. And that was the most extraordinary finding. I would have expected, particularly these are first time, most of them were first time business founders. None of them were from top universities, right? Just very, only 80% had college degrees, 20% did not, on and on and on, right? It was
Yeah.
very, very interesting. And
Yeah.
so, and because I think there's this thing that in our brains, right, that we think about companies that have had this kind of extraordinary success, right? These are incredibly fast growing companies. They averaged 169% year over year growth every year, right? Just you're more than doubling every year. And so I think there's this perspective that, that can't be me. That's the other person, right? That's the other guy. That's the other girl. And they're just normal people. They just figured out how to really run very, very fast growing businesses.
And I think that's interesting. And I want to come on to the value drivers you talk about. You talk about 8 value drivers. I want to come on to that in a bit because there's some key things that we know add that value. But before we come to that case, so we've gone from 32,000 to 386 down to 324, and then you did 95 interviews effectively. So you've got data there to pull on, looking at what made these businesses successful. And I think there's a number of things. You talked about Jim Collins and Good to Great earlier, and one of the key tenets that we talk about here in scaling up, and Jim talks about, is those businesses having their big, hairy, audacious goal. And you blew this out of the water when you talked to them, because you found out that only 1 out of 100 plus them had a big, hairy, audacious goal of what they're trying to achieve. So what was it that drove these people to, what was their thing? What was their North Star, as we talk about, that helped them aim at where they're going?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So Vern Hardish and Gino Wickman, a lot of folks gave blurbs for the book, and Vern actually wrote the foreword. And I was very honored that he agreed to do that. And he did that because he thought the research was just, so well researched and really interesting stuff. And what was super fascinating was this notion that I would have also expected, all of the scaling up frameworks that they had a BHAG or whatever, and they really didn't. But what they were focused on was dominating in the market that they were in. Number one, so they didn't necessarily say, we want to go to Mars like Elon Musk says, right? What they did say is we want to be the best at the market that we chose to be in. They were very competitive people. And what was really fascinating was one of the things I put up in that slide about these founders is that the majority of them had what I call the chip. They had a chip on their shoulder.
Mm.
They had something to prove to somebody. And I've got, I think, 10 personal stories, deeply personal stories in the book that those founders were willing to share with the audience. And one of the companies that they grew to over 100 million in revenue in 5 years, right? Pretty phenomenal growth. And it was a lady who grew up in a very traditional Midwest house, and her parents had saved money for her brother to go to college. And when she said, "Hey, how much did you save for me?" Right? They literally said, "Why would you go to college? We just assume you're going to be married and give us grandchildren, right?" And it pissed her off so much that that was her chip. And almost all of them had a chip. So I think it was this combination of, they wanted to dominate whatever business they were in and just crush their competitors and be successful and give back to the community. And then you had that chip there that they kind of leaned into. And it was that combination of probably as powerful, maybe not more powerful than having a BHAG.
One of the slides I took a photo of when you were talking was that bit about that business and how she did that and where she went on to. And if you're happy to, I'd love to talk about some of the things she learned in terms of building that business, because I think there's a real powerful message there. But let's just talk about that chip, because I think that's really interesting, isn't it? You and I both got MBAs. We've both been through that traditional route of learning how to run businesses. And I used to say to people when I finished my MBA 23 years ago. Gosh, 23 years ago, I thought the MBA was the death of entrepreneurship because it taught you how to do things by the book and you followed the rules. And I look at my bookshelf over there and it's full of all the MBA books, marketing manuals, operation manuals. These guys didn't have that. And a lot of MBAs, they don't have that chip. They're very good at, you might bring them in to do business, but they'll look through the business plan and say, it doesn't work. Whereas what these guys were doing was saying, well, it does work. And that's their chip that was driving them. So what was it, do you think, that made them passionate about it? This girl you're talking about, no money put aside for her. She had to get on her own. She was just there to do what Midwest girls would do, whatever it is. There was no logic there. So what drove them in that chip? What was the thing behind them?
They all had something, a different chip that drove them. That was just one example. There were some ex-family members, some ex-spouses. My dad doesn't appreciate the stuff that I do. So, I think that one of the things I talked about in Austin was I think there's this notion, particularly in America, that if you have this thing that's, driving you crazy, you have to go to therapy and get rid of it. And none of these folks did. They acknowledged it and they leaned into it. And it was interesting. So as I was getting their backstories, I was about 6 or 7 stories in, and I'm like, wow, this is a consistent theme. Because I wasn't asking the question, what's your chip, right? And when I kept hearing this recurring theme, I kind of threw that into my interview questions. And all I would say is, so Phil, what's your chip? And everybody knew exactly what I was talking about. And they're like, it's this, right? And the fact that they were aware of it, they acknowledged it and just said, it's always there. It's probably never going to go away. And I'm okay with that. And I'm using it to drive me forward. And then you add kind of the grit piece onto that. It's kind of, they're almost interchangeable, right? You got that chip and then you've got the grit, and you put those two things together and you just figure out how to make it work, right? And forget the MBA and forget academia. You just figure it out.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they just figured it out, because that's an interesting question. I'm a coach. I've been coaching for 15 years or so. I've been scaling up business for a long time. Are these people coachable? Because that's a question. A lot of people say, all business owners need to be coachable to be able to do it themselves. But you've got that chip, you've got the grit. If a coach like me came into business, knocked on the door and said, you need scaling up, here's the book, you need to go and do it, or here's 5 dysfunctions of a team, you need to work on this. Were they coachable?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I think some of them would be, a couple of them not. One of the I won't say who it is in the book that I profile, but he said, I literally don't read any business book. And I said, well, are you gonna read mine because you're in it, right? And he's like, I might read it. I'll thumb through, look at the section on us or whatever. And we kind of joked about it. And one of the interesting things I shared with you in Austin was, remember I gave you guys a bunch of money and I said, if you guys could tell me the most cited book,
Oh,
it was
yes,
not a
yes.
business book, right?
Yeah.
It was Meditations by Marcus
Marcus
Aurelius.
Aurelius. Yeah.
And that was super fascinating. And so I think, to answer your question directly, I would say that they're coachable, but probably not in the same ways that we coach other entrepreneurs, right? It's finding that unique thing, that little thread that is going to motivate them or change behavior, and then you start pulling on it. So
I think that's a really interesting point. I think actually, when you think about that, I was listening to a podcast recently with Tim Ferriss, and he was interviewing the founder of Roblox, David Baszucki, and he was asked the same question, and he said, "I have never read a business book." I know that's interesting. He's got in there and just done it, and I think there's a really powerful thing there. Actually, you don't need to read the business books to do it. You actually need to get on and just do it. And I think there's got
exactly.
to drive. So interesting. You've got the chip, whereas in traditional books we talk about having the big audacious goal and building towards something. But these guys, They're just driving towards something.
I'm going to give you another example of that. So I'm not supposed to have favorite CEOs that I talked to, but I did have a couple favorites. One of my favorites was a guy by the name of Kyle Mitnick, and he was running a company called Advertise Purple. And I loved his passionate emotion. He told me this story about they are in the business of essentially their affiliate marketing agency. So they would, well, if you want to go do a deal with the Kardashians, you would go to these guys and they would help, cut the deal. And then they actually take a share of the revenue that you get from those different partnerships. And he was telling me the story about that he was at the conference that they all go to. And so he's walking around, it's pretty early days for him, and they all have, it's very much kind of an old boy, network kind of thing. And he's like, most of the agencies then had 20 or 30 clients. And he said, I'm walking around, it's like, this is, big company here, big company here. And it's like, I got 30 clients, I've got Procter and Gamble, whatever. And this company has 30 clients. And he's like, and the way he was telling me, I was just cracking up. He's like, that's it? Like, that's it? I can get 30 clients and like, that's success? Like, no way. That's complete bullshit, right? And he went on to have thousands of clients, right? And a very, very successful business. And so, again, it's like that, I'm not going to do things like everybody else. And so, if you just put me in this, you kind of give me the pathway because that's what the MBA tells you should do. I'm going to do the opposite, and that's a very traditional entrepreneurial thing, right? You know that. So tell us to go right, then we're going to go left.
I love that. And interesting, you told the story about Russell Brunson and ClickFunnels. And if I think back, when I first discovered Russell Brunson, he was selling potato guns. And this would have been way back I started my business in 2004. So I must have discovered him sometime in the next few years after that. He was doing that. And I downloaded some stuff for him. And at the time, he was giving like a little MP3. In fact, this would tell the story. It was before we had iPhones, I reckon, because he was giving away little MP3 players to download your music onto with every subscription. I thought, what a great thing. But that was Russell Brunson way back 20 plus years ago. So did you talk to Russell Brunson's team as well, I think? Or yeah.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
What do you know? ClickFunnels, massive business now. Most entrepreneurs may have heard or may not have heard of him, but what did you learn from someone like him who's got that presence out there as well?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things was, so I'm a marketing major by degree. I was for my undergraduate, I was a marketing guy, and I'm very much kind of a sales and marketing type of person. That's how I'm oriented. And I always had this belief that, again, probably from the MBA and whatever, that you had to have all of these different ways to go to channel, to go to market, and they all need to be synchronized and consistent voice and all this kind of stuff. And it was another one of these huge surprises for me that each one of these companies went to market very differently than everybody else, but they focused on one channel and they mastered it. And what Russell has done is master, his voice, his presence. He's all over the place all the time, right? That's not something I would ever do and would ever want to do, but it's worked for the company really, really, really well. And this is another guy that, he will say he's not your traditional business guy. He was not an MBA, right? I think he might have graduated from Boise State or something,
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know the story there. That's interesting.
but he's just figured it out. And that's, and if you look at his old stuff, even 5 years ago, he comes across as this kid, right? Because he looks very young in the face or whatever. He's looking a little bit older now, but that's just trying to figure it out. But he's super authentic, right? And the whole company kind of leaned into that authenticity that he is a student of business and not necessarily of all these other things, but just figuring it out. And he's the first person to say, I've screwed up time and time and time again, but that's how you learn, right? And he's not afraid to say that, and he's not afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah. There's a whole load of things I want to unpick in that case. That mastering one channel, because if I think about how we've marketed over the last 20 years of running my business, we've tried lots of things. We've done LinkedIn marketing, we've done Instagram, we've done TikTok, we've done Facebook, we've done YouTube marketing, we've run the podcast, all those things. But I think what I'm hearing there is just master that channel. Use that word master, and that's really interesting, isn't it? Mastering it rather than scattergunning to try and do everything.
most entrepreneurs do one of two things. They try a bunch of different things. They aren't patient enough to let the results come in, and they're not looking at every aspect of whatever channel they're going to market through. So let's just say you're doing pay per click, and you're like, pay per click doesn't work.
Mm.
LinkedIn ads don't work, right? It's because you haven't looked at every part of it. It could be the offer, it could be the channel, it could be the sales cycle time. Like, there's all, it could be bad audiences, like there's all these dimensions when it comes to selling and marketing, right? That you have to think about and you have to really continue to test. And most entrepreneurs don't have the patience for that. They're like, we tried LinkedIn ads for 3 months and it didn't work. And one of the things that I shared with you guys and what I found in the book is that I don't care what channel you want to pick, cold calling, cold email, any ads, social media, value, they all work. And that's the problem. They all work, and you have to pick one and you have to master it, right? And so, five of the companies that are over 100 million in revenue, the way they go to market is through cold calling. And you talk to 20 other people, and they'll say cold calling doesn't work. And I'm like, really? I can put you in front of five companies that are over 100 million that have grown double digits every year, and that's how they do it because they mastered it, right? And most entrepreneurs are ADD-ish, and we just like we're all chasing squirrels and a shiny object, and we just don't have the tenacity and the patience just to push through to make one thing work really, really well because they will all work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think there's a big lesson there for every entrepreneur listening to this. And as you said, we've tried it for 3 months, it didn't work. Therefore, we move on. But actually, that shiny object, you need to find some of that tenacity, as Lencioni would say in Working Genius. Focus on that and actually get those people in and just drive it through. And don't be put off that the results don't work straight on. It's compounding at the end of the day. If you ever think about Warren Buffett's money, that didn't come on day one. That just slowly, 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 and then ticked up at the end. That's the way we need to do it with our marketing. It will come eventually.
One of my mentors is a guy by the name of Chet Holmes, who sadly passed away about 5 years ago. And I did a couple things with Chet Holmes 20 years ago. And for those of people that don't know Chet, so Charlie Munger was Warren Buffett's sidekick, right? Charlie Munger was kind of the operations guy, and Chet Holmes worked for Charlie Munger for 7 different businesses within the Berkshire portfolio. And every company that he went into, he doubled the revenues within 18 months, 7 times, right? And Charlie would say, Chet, thank you, that's great. Now go do it over here, right? And so he had this methodology that we won't get into, but the thing that he will talk about is this pig-headed discipline. And it's exactly the same thing. It is just to say, we're picking this channel. We think it fits our culture, our resources, our market, whatever. And we are going to have the pig-headed discipline to make it work. That's it, right? We're not going to go do these other things, and again, every single one of these channels can work. You just have to have the big-headed discipline, which is not something that most entrepreneurs have.
Yeah, no, it's really
From that perspective, right? To
yeah.
just go see it through.
It's really interesting, actually. I have not heard the name Chet Holmes for a long time. Back in 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I used to listen to his stuff regularly.
Yeah.
Really interesting to say that, and you're right. That was one of the messages he used to drum into people. Just focus on it and keep doing the same thing. So thank you for that reminder. Actually, great marketeer. Wow, that's interesting thing. But yeah, pig-headed discipline. So I love that. So we've got that thing there. We've got a chip. We've got don't do things like others. And I'm reading my little notes here. We've got focus on the one thing and just keep doing one thing. Don't read business books. Read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Read my book, though. Read my book.
Read your book, yeah. Scale up faster, yeah. If you need to read one thing, read Scale Up Faster, and also read Vern's book as well, because that'll put the structure in your business. But that sort of thing. So here we go. The next question is, you talked about raising money, and one thing you said at the beginning, you said you want to talk to those people who are different. Some people went out and raised money, and they built it around that. But what you want to do is talk to those people who had built a viable business. So that's really interesting because I've not thought it from that perspective. There is a different skill set between those people who go out to VCs, raise money on the back of an idea, and then drive it. You've got guys who are building viable businesses from scratch, 100 plus. So, you've got the Farm Girl Flowers you talk about a lot. What was the thing that drove them and enabled them to do what they did without that cash? How did they say, let's do it. Let's bootstrap this business. What makes the difference?
Yeah, what makes the biggest difference is two things. You have to, if you look at the levers of cash flow, the number one thing that will move the needle the most is your price and having what I call pricing authority. So if you can drive a high enough price, you can drive high enough margin, and you don't need to go out and raise money. Okay, so that's foundational element number one. You have to be have this pricing authority. So the second thing is, in order to have pricing authority, you need to have a differentiated offering. And when I do these workshops around this methodology we call boot scaling, which we talk about in the book, we focus on this notion of different is better than better. Okay, and I make everybody repeat that different is better than better. So the issue is if you're in a market and you look like everybody else, all of your competitors, you typically have to compete on price because in the customer's mind, right, you're the same as everybody, so they're going to naturally go towards I want a lower price from you, right? When you're uniquely different, if I stack up all the different competitors, right, and you truly objectively, not subjectively, you truly objectively stand out, you can ask a different price, right? Assuming there's a value statement there. Okay. That's what all these companies were really good at doing. And so when we go back to the BHAG versus my mission is to compete in the market and crush everybody, they were deep enough into the customer journey, what the customers wanted to buy, that they figured out how they could be different, right? And that was the key to getting pricing authority, which was the key to not having to raise money to go scale up faster,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It was those two things together, and you have to, and it's this thing where a lot of entrepreneurs will say, "Well, we are different than our competitors. We have better customer service, and right, and we're better at this and we're better than that." Well, better is very subjective, and
yeah,
most entrepreneurs and their companies, they think they're better than the competitors. Yet, from the customer's perspective, they're like, "No, you're not. You look like everybody else, right?" And it's very difficult to look in the mirror and say, "Are we objectively different?" Right? And so, different. This notion of different is objective. Better is subjective, right? And so, the more you can differentiate your offering, right? And there are hundreds or thousands of examples of companies that have done this really, really, really well. And at some point in time when you create a truly differentiated offering and you're making more money, competitors will ultimately start to copy you, right? That's just kind of a natural thing in business and capitalism. But you've got to kind of be bold and kind of stake that different way of going, not just going to market, but having a different offering. And that's a scary thing to do, right? Because you're like,
yeah. Got to
all the
stand
market
out.
kind of looks like this. I'm going to go this way, right?
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if it's going to work or not, right? But if you stick to it, and most will naturally kind of go back to, they might have really aggressive marketing, right? There was a marketing agency I worked with 10 years ago, and literally the guy wrote a book that says your marketing sucks, right? That gets your attention. And we did some work with them. And what was interesting was when we first started our engagement with them, they were truly different. And it was very bold messaging and whatever. And I think as they got pressure, with other marketing agencies, they kind of started to kind of go back into what everybody else was doing. And it really lost that luster. And that's a very normal thing to do. And so these businesses, for the most part, that are profiled in the book, have done a really, really good job of creating that differentiated offer in a way that matters to customers, right? And they could drive pricing authority. They have higher profit margins. They drive more cash, and they can scale faster.
yeah. I love that. And so here's a couple of questions that come off the back in that case. You talk about, that different is better than better, and you did get us to say that. I remember having that conversation. We all said that. Um, there's something there which links as well. That those people when they're sticking to their marketing, as you said just now, it's about focus. It's about pig-headed discipline, and in some ways having that same pig-headed ability to say, okay, we're going to be different, and we're going to keep doing it this way. Even when everyone else is zigging, you're going to be zagging. You're doing the opposite thing. Can you give us an example of any businesses in the book that you think really stood out to say this is where they did that really differently?
Yeah, so I'd say the one that probably there's a lot of them. They all did it in one way or another. The one that's probably easiest to kind of visualize is this farm grow flowers that we talk about. So um, entrepreneur from Indiana in the U.S. and she had this chip on her shoulder for sure. She had a floral shop in California for a while that didn't go very well, so she decided to shut that down and have an online floral e-commerce business, right? And so I don't know about Europe and the rest of the world, but in the States, the big 800-pound gorilla is this 1-800 Flowers company, right? And so, here's this teeny tiny little company going against this truly 800-pound gorilla. And so if she would have gone out and had this huge selection of flowers and it looked like everything else, where, the average order size was around $50-$55, she would have been crushed. And so what she did when she started is she would essentially put together the flower arrangement for you. You didn't get to pick, I want this one or that one or whatever. She's like, this is the one we're selling. And it was wrapped in burlap and it was beautifully presented, beautifully boxed. There are literally tons of videos of people unboxing their flowers. Like that just doesn't happen with 1-800 Flowers, right? And their average order price at the time, I'm not sure what it is now, was around $150, right? Completely starkly different. But if you were to look at the arrangement, and so they, for instance, they ended up doing a really cool partnership with the Gap. So instead of burlap, it'd be wrapped in like essentially jeans, right, in denim,
Oh, okay.
and did this really cool partnership with them. And again, it looks like nothing of any other flower arrangement you could get out there. And then the other thing they did was they knew that most women, so this was a female-led organization, female-founded, female-led, and most of their customers were females, not men. And so they kind of leaned into building that community and would say that they would send little kind of notes in there from the CEO just saying, running a female-led business is really, really difficult in this male-dominated world. And no matter what you're doing, whether you're raising a family, whether you're running a business or working whatever, we've got your back, right? And so it was the combination of that building community being very different messaging. And again, it was not better than 1-800 Flowers. It was objectively different, right? And that gave them pricing authority, and that allowed them to grow to over 100 million in revenue in 5 years.
Wow. And that's amazing. In 5 years, over 100 million. But it's that pricing authority. So they've actually got something that's really different in that sense. They're building something. They're not just being better. They're not competing with the $50 flower arrangement. They're doing 150. They're way outside the marketplace for that 150 versus a 50. I love that as a sense in that case, because then they've got pricing authority. So therefore, they don't need to go and raise capital because they've got money coming in every day. So they're building their own revenue stream, which is helping them grow their businesses in the first place, which is the key to making their businesses work in a different way.
Exactly.
So interestingly, thinking about that in that case, so one of the key things that every MBA these days will be taught is very much around Clay Christensen's view about jobs to be done. And therefore, having an ideal customer profile, focus on your JTBD. How did they find their ideal customer and how did they identify their job to be done as a result of that?
I'm not a fan of the name jobs to be done. I think it's just kind of this really abstract thing. Um, but we'll kind of jump in a little bit deeper. And in Silicon Valley and the tech world, they will talk about product market fit, right? So you just need to understand your customers so well and your users that you can't pull the product away from them, right? They just love it so much. It's this notion of product market fit. Same thing of what all these companies do. This is the job to be done. And so they figured that out because they were so deep in the trenches with their customers and would continuously ask questions and are we doing the right thing and how can we improve the experience and how we can improve the value and what if we did this and what if we did that. And that also came around creating community, which was another big factor in what these companies did. And so they would talk to their customers more than other folks. And so I mentioned kind of at the top of the pod that they didn't have a business plan, right? And the reason they didn't have a business plan is because they went out and talked to people, like, and so And all of them told me almost the exact same thing. They said, you know what? Most entrepreneurs, especially the MBAs, will sit in their office and they will spend 3 months writing all this stuff down of what's going to happen, right? And it's all completely made up. It's 100% made up, from the financials to the way what your customer wants, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're like, forget it. We don't need to have a business plan. We're just going to go actually do stuff. We're going to talk to our customers, right? We're going to figure it out. We're going to test. We're going to ask lots of questions. We're going to fail. We're going to keep, stubbing our toes and figuring it out. And that's what they all did, right?
yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of how you get to product market fit in the tech world. They did basically exactly the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So actually coming up with that idea and just talking to people, I think there's a key thing there, isn't it? Um, there's almost that risk thing around that. It's just get on and do it. Come back to that entrepreneurial mindset and the MBA. The MBA will write the business plan and go and talk that around hundreds of people. Whereas actually these entrepreneurs are just getting on and do it. They believe in something so passionately. They're pig-headed in their approach to doing it. They've got their chip on their shoulder. They're just going to make it work. But from their perspective, they know what they want, and they're going to find the customers that want that by asking the question to say, what is it you need differently?
Exactly. Exactly.
But I,
Literally the only company that wrote a business plan, the guy just got his MBA.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Okay, okay. So there's something there in that case. And interesting, isn't it? Because if you go and ask customers what they want, talking about farm girl flowers, people wouldn't say they want to pay $150 for a bunch of flowers with a written note in it. So you have to take that gamble sometimes of going to do things that you just believe in as well. And from that perspective, we talked about big, hairy, audacious goal earlier. I love the word purpose, and maybe purpose gets a bit overused by some business owners and academics in the last few years. But I still believe that having a purpose above and beyond making money drives you, whether it's your chip or not. Does the word purpose ever come up for these people? Do they ever think that my purpose in business is this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I pushed pretty hard on the behead concept, because I believe in it too. But they all did have a purpose. And it was very different for each person, each founder. Some, it was a personal purpose. Some was a corporate purpose. One of the companies that we spent a lot of time with, they will, if you have a website and you are selling advertising, these guys will come in and they'll essentially take over the whole revenue platform, right? So imagine the trust that has to go into that, right? And because they know that they have all this technology that can increase your revenues by 30, 40, 100, 200%. And then they actually take a piece of the additional revenue. And that was their purpose. They knew that most organizations, even just a newspaper, right, that has their website, they're not good at the advertising side of it from an e-commerce perspective. It's a whole different set of technology and intelligence and things that you have to do. And so their purpose was to help what they call publishers, which is their customers, right, really extract as much revenue as they possibly can out of their website. That was their purpose, single-minded purpose, and they figured it out. They had really, really good tech to do that. And it took them three different pivots to figure that out, right? And they're like, these guys are struggling and they're doing a crappy job. We can really help them. So
We can do it differently. I think that's interesting. So therefore, the purpose is actually about helping other people do that thing, and because they know there's a better way of doing it as well.
exactly.
I love that. So interesting. If you think about purpose and moving on in that case, building a business is one thing, and when you're talking scaling up about build it, grow the value, and exit, and sometimes the value of your life work. And I want to come back to that piece about you because you said at the beginning, you've grown and scaled and sold 4 businesses. Before I come on to you, I want to ask that question. Did these people ever have the view that when I hit a number, I'm going to exit, or this is what I'm doing it for? Where did exit fit into their view?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised here. I thought most of them would have this number in their head, and when they hit that number, they're going to exit. And there was one really funny story. This is a UK company. I will probably keep it private for now, but um, they are incredibly profitable. They're over 100 million revenue now. I actually got some insights into literally how much money was in the bank account, what their net margins were, everything. And so we were chatting about, and I asked the question, are you interested in never selling and, and exiting? And he's like, yeah, if I get to my number. And I said, well, what's your number? Right. And I think it was 10 million quid or something, right? And I'm like, I just laughed out loud. I'm like, you were there like 5 years ago. Like, what's going on? And it was really funny. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. I guess I probably am, but I love doing this, and it's the purpose. And what else are
Yeah.
you gonna do? And
Yeah.
I've got a sell-side advisory business, and every founder who I've helped sell their company, they'll say I'm done, right? If they're particularly in their mid 50s or whatever, they're like, I'm done. And I'm like, no, you're not. And so they're like, no, no, I'm done. And I'm like, no, in 6 months you'll call me and you'll say, I started another company. And it's the same case. And so I think it's this, maybe it's business is a game to all these folks and to all of us, right? And so many of these folks could, I mean, from a financial perspective, they got complete and utter freedom, but they go to work every day, right? And I think it gives them purpose, to your point. It's kind of back to that. And I think there's this fear that if I sell, because they don't need to work, right? They've got the economics to not have to work, but they won't have any purpose, right?
I think there's a big thing around that. I really think that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because the business has become their purpose. I often talk about a purpose above and beyond making money. And if I put my business models hat on, I draw a curve, and it's a bit of an S curve of businesses scaling, and it goes from the energy in that business. And at some stage, most business owners want to exit. But then they build it and they realize actually they just love what they've done. They feel real pride around what they've created, and they don't want to let go of it because actually that's become them as well. And if I put my consulting hat on, I come into business, help them structure it so they can step on and do it again. But the key thing there for me is the game. They want to just keep doing it. They're good at it. They don't need to stop. So I wonder, from a work-life balance point of view, did you get any indication around whether work-life balance, work-life integration mattered to them, or was it all work, work, work?
Yeah, I did ask the question of everybody. I literally said, do you take vacations? If so, how many do you take? How long? Right? Do you really step away? Like, how many hours a week do you work? And I'd say the average answer was, in terms of hours worked, it was between 50 and 60 hours a week. And most of them said, I might take a week or two off, but I'm kind of working when I do, right? And I would say there was a small percentage who felt the need to do that, that they probably didn't have, they didn't build the business where they could truly step away for a couple of months, right? But most of them, I would say, they could, but they didn't want to because, again, it was their purpose and they enjoyed it and legitimately, right? That was most of them. One of the guys that has a business that it's a real estate investment trust. They're now over 5 billion in assets under management, and he would take, I think he said, about 2 months a year off.
Okay.
It's a somewhat of a Christian faith based kind of organization, so they do a lot of work overseas and
Mm.
whatever. But he's like, but I'm always kind of on because I want to be, not because I
Yeah.
have to be, right?
Yeah.
And I enjoy the business and I enjoy what I do, and I have this purpose for the business and the purpose kind of personally.
Yeah, I love that, and it really isn't it. I'm always on, but I want to be doing it. So there's a transformation in mindset. So they're not building something with the intention of selling it one day. They're building it because they want to do it. They've got that chip on their shoulder. They want to make something different. They're pig-headed and big bloody minded about it. Um, but interesting what you said there is they've not structured it so it can be sold. And maybe that's intentional or not. They've not thought about those things in terms of putting in that structure which enables them to step away and do the next thing. So maybe there is an avenue for coaching at some stage, but they just got to realise they could step away one day.
Right.
Um, was there any advice when you listen to these people as well? It's fascinating for just understanding what you're talking about now. But was there anything you heard from them you thought that doesn't stack up? Anything you found contradictory between different people? You said, hey, that's one thing, but it's completely opposite for somebody else. Anything there?
I would say generally all of them were very different than everybody else. I mean, just by virtue of their success, right? Doubling revenues every year for 4 years, doing it on a bootstrap basis, that is extraordinary. They are the 1% of the 1% in American business for sure. So there's no way that they could do that and do the same thing as everybody else because that's not normal, right? And so, what was really interesting is I really tried to go into interviewing all these folks and doing the research with a completely open mind. I did not have a thesis about how business should be run or anything else when I went into this, except for my own experiences, right? And by the way, I didn't achieve this level of success. I didn't have the kind of growth rates that these guys did, right? So I really went in with this very open mind, as I want to learn myself too, right?
Yeah,
Um,
lovely,
and
brilliant.
there wasn't really anything besides maybe I don't read business books because I do that I would just like be. I was like, really, that's the way you're doing things, right? And so I had this kind of open canvas to just ask questions, get responses, and then sit back. I've got a stack of papers literally about this big, and kind of went back through, visually, manually, and started taking notes, whatever. And then I threw everything in a chat. And I'm like, what do you think about all this, right? And it was all these extraordinary learnings that just were different than the way 99% of businesses are run, right? But consistent across all of the companies in the book, for sure.
So you've just blown open the closet of all those secrets that business can do. So anybody now can read Scale Up Faster and go and do it,
In
or can
theory.
they? What's yeah, exactly. Because it's great. You've just distilled this down. You've spoken to 95 entrepreneurs. You've looked at 32,000 original businesses. So there's some, use that word grit earlier, but there's something there which drove them all to do this. And without going through all the detail, what's the thing that every business owner needs to learn from this? If you were to give one key tip, that you say, business owner, do this, and it will help you. What's that thing, do you think? If you could distill it down to one thing, it may be impossible, but what's the one
It's
thing you think
it's the
stood
F
out?
word. It's the F word. Focus.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what
Focus.
you're going to say then. Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Because Vern likes to say, his big takeaway from my book was, and what he says, which isn't really kind of appropriate, but he says, sell one thing one way. And the point of that was, they weren't trying to do 50 different things and they weren't trying to go to market in 12 different ways. They had a core offering that was highly differentiated. Different is better than better, that they went to market in one primary method. Um, so if you kind of distill all that down, it's focus, right?
Yeah.
On doing
Yeah.
something really, really well in one way and being the absolute best at it. And
Well,
pick your analogy from life, whether it's sports, right? Where, and pick your whether it's British, European football or our football, whatever. The stars do that, right? They do the little things over and over and over in a very disciplined way to get better and better and better at it. And that's what these guys did. Um, and that is contrary to most entrepreneurs and the way that we are shiny object chasing people, right? We just because that's boring stuff. Like, God, I've got to do another A/B test, and I got to talk to another customer. I know my customer, right? It's like, no, you probably don't, right? And that's the thing, and that's why most businesses have not achieved this level of success because they don't have that focus and the pig-headed discipline to just master every single aspect of the business to get better and better and better and better.
it's interesting you use that word mastery. I was just looking for my scaling up book, which is on my desk here as we talk. And I think it's really interesting. If I was to go back and look in here, I think the one thing that you've just said there, we talk about that word discipline. And Vern always says routine will set you free. And the other bit you said, which really resonated with me, is habit. If you want to master something, you need to build a habit of it. You need to do it over and over again, and then you become the expert on it. And whether it's the 10,000 hours rule that we've all talked about in the past from Gladwell, or with something else, but actually there's a key thing there, isn't it? It's about doing it and focusing it, mastering it, and just being pig-headed to make sure it's going to do it. Which is a real interesting thing, is it? Because a lot of people talk about, if the strategy doesn't work, change. But you're saying actually they just focus on that one thing, and that's what they did. Focus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about the book Atomic Habits that came out right a couple of years ago, and you know, the to me like the whole it's just kind of a funny concept because it's like we all know this stuff, right? We know how to be healthy, right? Eat healthy, work out, right? Exercise, right?
Yeah.
You don't need anything else besides those principles, those basic
Yeah.
things. But we're
Yeah.
all looking for the easy button, right?
Yeah.
And the folks that are truly accomplished in life, right, are those folks like we just talked about that are willing to put in the 10,000 hours of doing the same thing in the drudgery every day, but just that 1% improvement, right? Just they achieve great results. And these companies were able to do that through force of will, through discipline, through culture, through the kind of people that they hire, all this kind of stuff, right? It was just doing the same thing over and over again, mastering it.
And interesting, I've just, as you were talking there, I was thinking, the people you mentioned about James Clear and Atomic Habits. If I think about Benjamin Hardy writing his books, and if you've not read Benjamin Hardy's books, he's amazing what he does and how he works with Dan Sullivan. And interesting, I read an interview that Benjamin Hardy did a few years ago with Mr. Beast when he was talking about his model, and that was around just doing the same thing over and over again, and that's how he built his following on
Yep.
YouTube. And it's about focus, so I love that. Pete, we're going to come to the end of this now. And we said we'd try and limit it to an hour, and there's so many more questions. What's the one thing that I haven't asked about these entrepreneurs? You'd say, Phil, this is also a thing. You talk about focus. If there was one other thing, what else would you pull out that you would say this is something worth considering?
So I like to say that any business problem is a people problem, almost 100% of the time, right? And these folks did a fantastic job of building incredible cultures that attracted the right kind of people and being able to talk about that culture, I mean, a kind of story like fashion that really helped them attract the right kind of people. One part of the analysis we did was we actually scraped the website of the career section from all 324 companies. And then we compared them to their direct competitors. And what was astounding was the way that they would describe working for their company was starkly different than their competitors. Their competitors was very boring. It was like, we
Wow.
are a value added company that is focused on our customers and, professional development, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus this very flowery, rich description of what it's like to work for that company. And what came out of that is it would reject and, repel and attract people, the right kind of people. And so um, I have a business that I'm working with in Florida that's an industrial distribution company. And we did an exercise where we asked their employees to describe the culture. And I do this with all of my clients. And they would say things like, we work long hours and it's very stressful because, if they need to get supplies out to a construction site and they need it now, they will pick up, they'll do whatever they can to do, get in the truck, take that stuff out there, right? But we have everybody's back, and so if Phil's out kind of delivering this, I got your back and I've got you covered, right? And if you were just to kind of listen to them, you're like, oh my God, I would never work for this company, right? So we helped them build this culture statement that described that in rich detail. And what happened was the number of candidates went down significantly, but the candidates that are coming through are sticking. They're much better because the last thing that they would want is somebody who works an 8 to 5 job, right? And build a whole hiring process like the interview questions to be able to suss that out of whether they're a culture fit. And these companies did a really, really great job of that. So it wasn't just about the founders, it was about their job was to create this amazing culture. And it was different from company to company. They were very starkly different across the board, but they all knew what their culture was like. And they had an interviewing and a hiring process in place that would first suss out for that culture, then suss out kind of these core competencies across every role, and then did a kind of job to be done interviewing process. They knew when this candidate was kind of through that funnel, they knew, with a 99% degree of confidence, that person could do the job and would fit the culture. And so that was the other big thing that these companies were able to do. That was a huge contributor to their success. And the very first chapter of the book is about culture and how they did this.
I love that. And interesting, one of the things you talk about in the book is about rather than just building your ideal client profile, but actually you said that they built their ideal employee profile, the IEP rather than ITP. And I think that's really interesting, that focus around, who is your ideal employee, because actually then you can find that perfect fit. And you talked about, focus around effectively describing that culture before going out to hire. Because as you say, you don't want a 9 to 5 employee if you're having to deliver things out of hours.
Right, exactly right. And there's lots of books that have been written about if you focus on your employees, they'll take care of your customers, right? There's tons of books about this. And that's kind of what they did. They didn't, and all the stuff I write about in the book, they would never, they didn't use those words. They didn't talk about it like that, but that was kind of the
Mm,
consistent theme. And that was a big
mm,
one,
yeah.
that they wouldn't say we focus on culture necessarily. A couple did, but not many of them. But when you kind of dug into actually how they operated and all of the questions and answers they gave, that was really the essence of the business.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually because one of the things you showed us in Austin, and I'm looking at it as I talk. You talked about when they were doing their interview screening, culture fit was number one, fundamental competencies number two, but evidence of producing job outcomes was number three. So actually, you're going through that process there, and you're trying to find people who fit to start with, and they got the competencies. But the third was actually the producing the outcome. So it's really interesting how other businesses might look at it from the other perspective.
That's exactly right. Yep, they look at either did they come from my industry, did they have the, did they have the, do they, have industry knowledge or whatever. But so one of the executives said, we hire for the soul, we train for the role.
Love that, love it. Yeah.
And I loved that statement, right? And it was meaning it's about the culture. And I think I asked all of you guys, and I ask this frequently, when a person didn't work out in your organization, what do most people say? They say they weren't a fit.
Mm,
What does that mean? Let's dig into what is not a fit. It's a culture fit, right?
mm,
And that's why that's just so important. It was at the top of the list of what all these companies did.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
really made sure they hired for culture fit.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And it's culture fit there. So that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? And going through that process, understanding who you are, getting the right people on board. Jim Collins talks about the right person on the right seat in the right bus with the right attitude. But it's this attitude and culture. So you've got to define your culture first, and that's obviously being developed by the owner. But they're not talking culture; they're talking about it's the fit. Do they feel right? And that's probably a feeling intuitive thing rather than an analytical thing as well, probably.
No, it's actually an analytical thing. It's quite the opposite. And there's been lots of stats about, um, and I used to say this too. I trust my gut, right? It's wrong most of the time. And I've got,
Ooh.
$500,000 of wasted expenses on people that I trusted my gut, and they turned out to be a really bad fit. And I think most business owners that have had companies for a while will say the same thing. It's like, I trusted my gut on this person, and oh my God, I was so wrong, right? And so you do need to be analytical, and you do need to be able to figure out truly what is that culture, right? And then coming up with a process where you're not trusting your gut, you're asking questions that will suss out very specifically, are they a good fit or not? So to go back to this example of I don't want to hire an 8 to 5 person. Like, you ask a question: how many times have you missed a family dinner or a kid's a kid's sporting event because you had to respond to a customer, right? And if that person says, "Oh, I'll never miss a dinner with my family," whatever, fine, right? That might be a great personal trait, and that person might be a great fit for somebody else if that's not your culture, right? If your culture is you drop everything to go help a customer, that's not a good person, and that's okay.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. So you're putting some analytical question around it that actually helps them identify will that person fit into our way of working, our way of being, because that's what we value in this business, the behaviors we expect. I think that's a really interesting example. You shared some great examples there. Thank you. Let's just think, as we come to a close in that case, you talked about boot scaling and blitz scaling in the past. Um, just tell me a bit about boot scaling, because you said one of the things you're doing at the moment is boot scaling, and that's one of the things that you're working on, but also blitz scaling. So tell me the difference between the two and what that means for you and how you're going out to market with some of those things.
Yeah, so there's a book called Blitzscaling, and that's a kind of a trade name that Reid Hoffman and his co-author, I think Chris Rowe, came up with. And he's a very Silicon Valley guy. So Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn, former CEO of LinkedIn. And his belief is you go raise a ton of money, ton of outside capital, and hire as many people as you can and go to market as quickly as you can and try to grab market share. Okay. That's fine. It's not appropriate for 99.99% of most companies, and very difficult to do, right? And I've got friends and former business partners that believed in that methodology, and they would go out, they'd raise, Series A, B, C, D, E, and F, right? And I had one friend of mine who I think they were getting ready to close their Series C or D round. And I asked him, I said, if you look at preferred rights and all the stuff that comes with preferred shareholders, I said, have you ever calculated how much money you'd have to sell the company for to actually make this worthwhile and valuable to you versus if you literally had a job and a salary? And he's like, no, it's a silly question. I'm like, go home and do the math. Like
Wow.
literally
Wow.
go through those documents and look at all the preferred rights and liquidation preferences and all this kind of stuff and actually do the math. And he came back about a week later and he said, I'm so glad you asked me to do that. He said, I'm actually stepping down from the company. And
Wow.
because he said the company would have to sell for such a high valuation for him to literally even get $1 million in his pocket that he said, we'll never sell the company for that amount of money. Never. And so he's like, this is just kind of, he goes, I just never did the math. And so, so kind of point being that, if you can retain control, bootstrap the business, not do the blitz scaling thing, you're in a much better position personally. And so that's the point of the boot scaling is helping. So I basically took the lessons from the book and built a methodology around helping companies scale up without having to raise external capital. And it's all of these things kind of put together.
Love that. And interesting, you showed us a phrase which I loved when we were in Austin. You said growing boot scaling is growing much faster than your competitors without selling your company and your soul to outside investors to do so. And I love that bit, selling your soul. That's a bit that resonates.
When you get bankers, right, whether it's VCs, private equity fund, whatever, they think differently than you do. And all of these companies and my businesses where I did not raise capital, every decision you make, business comes down to basically making decisions, right? And so when you don't have external influences, you make decisions for customers and employees. That's really your focus, maybe for yourself, but generally speaking, your customers, employees. When
Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
outside influences now, you're thinking about, well, geez, if I had spent all this money, would my equity board, would they approve of this, right? And it's like,
Mm.
so you're making very different decisions. Um, and look, raising growth capital is fine for a lot of companies, and everybody has different objectives and different needs and different ones or whatever. But not so every one of these companies, I would ask them, why did you not go raise external capital, right? And the predominant answer was we didn't think we could, or we didn't know how. And there were a few that said that's just not that's just not what we wanted to do. And but so that was kind of the when they first got started and kind of even maybe a couple of years into the trajectory. But all of them would say now that thank God we didn't do that because we are in control of our destiny and we've built a really great culture that is focused on everybody else, not focusing on outside influences like VC firms and PE firms or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. So Pete, look, coming to a close in that case, I love this. Great conversation. Thank you. Um, if you could go back in time and give the young Pete some advice when you were scaling your old businesses, what's the one bit of advice you would give from what you've learned now with hindsight?
Don't give up your corporate job because running a business is really hard. No, I'm just kidding.
Stick with IBM.
Go back to IBM, buddy.
Love
I
it.
think it would be just be vulnerable. Like, do not be afraid to ask for help. Um, and it's so funny because both in the work that I do now and the book and everything else that um, as a business owner, particularly with your company and your employees, like you don't. it's hard to be vulnerable. It's really hard to be vulnerable. You want to be the smartest guy. You don't want to let people down, right? And even though, people will say, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, you kind of do,
Yeah.
right? In a
Ego.
way,
Yeah.
right? There's
Yeah.
always an ego thing there. It's like, I don't want to fail people. I don't want to fail myself, maybe my family, whatever. And so people then don't reach out for help. It's either getting a coach, reading business books, right? And, a big reason why I wrote this book, my mission is it's really hard and you don't have to do it alone. And there are ways to do this right, right? Where again, you don't have to give up control and still have a very profitable, fast growing business. And I wanted to help kind of make that path a little bit easier for all the entrepreneurs that are out there.
Yeah, congratulations you doing it because I think you could say you're going to save a lot of people a lot of time, a lot of heartache in the future because of what you've done. So thank you for that.
I hope so.
What, what
I hope so.
what's next, Pete? You've written this book, Scale Up Faster. Look into the future. What's next on your agenda?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things going. So we're building a generative AI platform that takes in all of your external data, your financials, your operations, whatever, and takes all of the lessons from me, from Vern, from Gino, and all these people, and all of the greatest business minds in the world, and will help basically supplement and complement guys like Phil. So I may talk to you only once a month or maybe once a quarter, but I may have that burning thing that I want an answer to right now. And the problem with a lot of the AI tools that are out there is it doesn't have context, right? And so if you know my business because you've been working me with 10 years and you know my business inside and out,
Hmm.
the advice and recommendations I get from you will be 100 times better than Pete, who doesn't know anything about my company, right? And so that's the idea behind this platform we call Growth Brain, is to have this very rich, very deep context, and then use all the large language models that are out there then to come back with very specific advice and to support and complement the accountability factor that folks like coaches and wealth advisors and financial advisors get, right? Because, I can give you a system and tell you to use it every day, but without Phil there going, Pete, did you do it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm only halfway there. And so it's really kind of a complementary. So there's kind of two sides of this thing. There's the advisor portal and then the client portal, and it kind of brings these two things together. So that now as an advisor, I can see what the client's working on and I can nudge and cajole and push and say, did you do the stuff that it told you to do? Like your EBITDA margins are way down. Let's go talk about it, right? So that's one of the next big things for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And obviously in Austin, we had the conversation with Jeff Woods. Did you see Jeff when we were there as well?
I did. I did.
Yeah, brilliant in terms of that connection with setting context around things. So that Pete, amazing, some real lessons for business owners, from scale up, startup people, entrepreneurs, and would be entrepreneurs that I think a lot of people can learn from. So thank you for that. I think there's some messages we can all take from that. If people wanted to find Pete, where would they go? What's the place they go looking for you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I think on Pete G. Martin on LinkedIn, and my email is pmartin at askmyboard or pmartin at growthbrain.com. And a little bit of Twitter, not too much out there. A little bit of Instagram, not too much out there. So LinkedIn is definitely the best place to get me. So
Focus, focus, focus.
exactly.
Love that, Pete. Thank you very much. Appreciate your conversation, and I'd love to talk to you in 2026 to find out more as we go forward, especially about Growth Brain. I think that's a wonderful thing. So thank you very much,
Fantastic.
Pete Martin.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.
Thanks.